Hello, and welcome to the AS Religious Studies revision session within the Philosophy of Religion module. What I hope to do today is to go over the problem of evil and suffering, and I'm hoping to reinforce your understanding of the nature of evil and suffering and to try and understand the problem of evil and suffering for religious believers and try to quickly look at how to answer a question on this subject within the examination paper. So if you have a look at what the WJEC specification wants you to know about this topic, we have to look at the different types of evil. So we will have a quick look at moral evil and natural evil. Then we have to look at the logical problem itself, the problem of evil and suffering. We have to look at the classical version of the problem of evil and suffering, as shown by Epicurus, and we will be then moving on to looking at the modern version development of the problem of evil, as explained by Mackey, and then we will move on to look at what William Rowe has said about the problem of evil and suffering, and lastly Gregory Paul. So let's just have a look at what type of question that could come up on this topic. So this is just an example question. Explain the problem of evil and suffering for religious believers. So obviously have a look at the triggers every time within the essay question. It's an explanation. So try and use terms like because, this means, and try and make sure that you have enough depth in your explanations. Don't describe and certainly don't list within your answers. So it's a 30-mark question on the exam paper. So we will have a look at what you could actually include in the answer on this question. So first of all, what do we mean by evil and what do we mean by suffering? So the definition of evil is something or someone that's being bad or are doing morally incorrect things. It's seen as morally incorrect behavior. And when we talk about suffering, we are talking about undergoing distress, pain, or any type of hardship in life on earth. So if you have a look at the 8 illustrations or photos on this slide, press the pause button and try and go over the 8 and try and exemplify what is either evil or what types of suffering you can see within the 8 illustration. So give yourself some time to go over them, try and identify the evil and suffering in each one of them. Press pause now. Okay, so hopefully you will have seen the photo here, obviously, of Adolf Hitler, and you could actually see how he's classified as evil and all the suffering that he caused during the Second World War. You can link that to the photo here of the Holocaust and all the suffering that was caused in this period of time. There is also a tsunami on this illustration. Again, that's the suffering that is caused through tsunamis. There's bullying happening over here. We have illness, we have terrorism, we have floods, and we have war. So these are all things that are classified or can be classified under evil and suffering. So what is the connection between evil and suffering? There is a connection, obviously. Evil causes suffering for others. So within the course, you need to show understanding of what moral evil is and what is meant by natural evil. So test yourself. Could you actually explain what moral evil is and what natural evil is and the differences between them? So press the pause button and try and test yourself. So, moral evil is any suffering that is the result of the actions of a free will agents. So that's the term that we use for people, humanity, the decisions people make. People have the ability to choose to do good or bad actions, and when they choose to do evil, it causes suffering. Quite simply put, suffering has been caused by people and their bad decisions or bad actions. Natural evil is any suffering that is the result of actions beyond the control of free will agents, i.e. people, usually those that have occurred as a result of natural order. Simply put, it's suffering that happens naturally, not caused by humans. So bearing this in mind, I'd like you to test yourself on the examples of natural and moral evils that can be seen on this slide. So I'd like you to pause the slide, pause the presentation and go through every one of the photos and illustrations and try and explain to yourself if they are moral evils or are they natural evils or are they actually both or can they be both? So press the pause button and try and go over each one of the photos and illustrations. Okay, hopefully you've been able to go through some of the photos here and illustrations and trying to exemplifying them as natural or moral evils. So natural evils would be seen as a volcano, an earthquake, famine, old age, tsunamis, death, cancer could be seen as natural, and floods or flooding could be seen as natural. The moral evils seen here are the Holocaust was man-made, it was caused by humans, free will agents, terrorism, war, and you can see bullying is again seen as moral evil. But some of these, I hope you've been able to identify, can actually be both natural and moral evil. So flooding, some would agree that it could be both natural, but again, it is a moral evil because of the way that we have actually treated the environment and the world, and we are causing global warming. So it could be a moral evil as well as a natural evil. Death again could be both. Famine could be both. It could happen naturally with the weather, the lack of rain, which causes again a lack of crops and food, or it could be a moral evil, a famine resulting from war, for example. So these can be seen as both natural and moral evils at the same time. So now that we understand what is evil and what is suffering and the different types of evil and suffering, the moral and the natural, we have to now try and look at how evil and suffering in the world could actually cause problems for people who actually believe in the existence of God. Again, you can test yourself. Can you actually explain what the problem is in the belief in God and the existence of evil and suffering on earth? So what I want you to do is try and think, first of all, of 8 characteristics that belong to a god. I'm talking about the classical theistic God, which is seen within Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. So, if you're able to, can you list um, 8 characteristics that actually tell us about the nature of God? What is God like? So press the pause button and try and think of 8 characteristics that belong to God. Okay, hopefully you have been able to list some of the 8, if not the 8 characteristics that belong to God. These are 8 that I would maybe refer to. Obviously, you may have thought of some different characteristics, which is fine. So, religious believers within the 3 religions that I stated in the last screen believe that God is omnibenevolent, He's all loving, He's omnipotent, He's all powerful, He is omnipresent, He's all present, He's omniscient, He's all knowing. He's seen as the creator God. He's seen as the Father, God the Father. He is a righteous God, and he is seen as a fair God. So these are the 8 characteristics that I will briefly go over and try and exemplify how these beliefs on God may cause a problem for religious believers. So, first of all, before going through them, I think what a lot of students tend to have a problem with in answering a question on this topic is that they do lack the depth, and they get stuck on trying to answer the question. So I would make sure in an explain question that you actually do explain these characteristics before moving on to showing how each characteristic will or could cause a problem for religious believers. So a tip that I would recommend is that you actually use the terms within the characteristics to actually help you explain what each of them is, what they mean. So especially if you look at the first 4, if you use the simplified version of the religious terms instead of omnibenevolent, obviously look at the word all loving. Obviously use the word love. So omnibenevolent really means that he's all loving. He loves everything on earth and everyone on earth. Omnipotent and all-powerful God. Use the word power to help you. He is powerful. He has the power to do anything and everything. If he is all present, it means that he is everywhere. And if he's all knowing, he knows everything that has happened, that is happening, and what will happen in the future. If he is the creator, he is the one who has created everything. So before the existence of the universe, there was nothing. So God is the creator. He has created everything within the universe. He is seen as God the Father. A father's role is to look after his children. For religious believers within Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, humanity, people of the world, are seen as God's children, and God is the Father. His role is to look after humanity. If he is a righteous God, he would want right things to happen within his world. He would like to be seen as a good God and doing the good things and the right things on earth. And lastly, if he's seen as a fair God, then he would like to see fair things happen. He would like to see people treated fairly. So try and use the terms within the characteristics to try and help you explain what each and every characteristic means. So after looking at the different characteristics of God, you would actually try and move on and explain how each of the characteristics could cause a problem for religious believers when they witness evil and suffering happening in the world. So if God is omnibenevolent, he's all loving, he loves everyone and everything. Therefore, if he loves everyone and everything, part of feeling love towards beings would try to actually make sure that they don't suffer from evil in this world. So both of the characteristics here, they can't go together. An all-loving God would not want to see evil and suffering in the world. If he is an all-powerful God, then that would mean that he would have the power to stop any evil and suffering in the world. So, for example, looking at war as an example of evil and suffering, God would have the power to stop all wars on earth if he wanted to, if he was all-powerful. But for some reason, he doesn't. If he's omnipresent, he's all present, he is everywhere. So that means he is witnessing every evil and suffering that is happening on earth. You can't excuse God as not seeing any suffering or evil that's happening. You can't excuse him saying, well, maybe he didn't know about it, because he is all present. So during the Second World War, being all present, God would have been in Europe during that time, and he would have witnessed all the suffering that was caused in that period of history. If he's all-knowing, it does mean that he knows that everything that has happened, that is happening in present time, and he actually knows that what's going to happen in the future. Well, if he knows what is happening or what has happened, then you again can't excuse him from not knowing that evil or suffering was happening on the world. If he is the creator God and nothing existed before he created the universe and the world, then he has created everything in this world, and that would actually mean that he has created all the evil people and evil events on earth and all the suffering. He has created the suffering for everybody on this world. If he's the father, his role would be to look after humanity, his children. So a part of the role of the father is to love and to look after his children. When we see evil and suffering in the world, it's very hard for us to try and justify a father God that is looking after his people. If he is a righteous God, it means that he wants the right things to happen. He wants good things to happen. He is a good God. But again, when we look at the world, we see so much evil and suffering. It's far from good. So again, these don't balance together. And lastly, if we have a look at God as a fair God, there is evil and suffering in the world. A fair God would not want good people, innocent people, to suffer from evil. So, as you can see, as you've gone over the 8 that I've exemplified, you may have other characteristics that you could refer to, but these, the different characteristics of God that you see here, and if you have gone over these, they will make sure that you do have enough content for your answers. So these do not balance well with evil and suffering in the world. If this God did exist, then these technically shouldn't. And that's basically the inherent problem that we have with the problem of evil and suffering for religious believers, that believe in the God that you see the characteristics on the left. And here are just two examples of memes that have been created to actually just try and address and identify the problem of evil and suffering. A reference to COVID, where is God during COVID, or where was God during COVID? And then the suffering of innocence. Where is God? Why doesn't he stop them? Why has this been created? Why would babies suffer? Now then, we have to look at the specification again for your course. And within this unit, you have to refer to four philosophers and what they have tried to exemplify within the problem of evil and suffering. So if there is a general question on the problem of evil and suffering, an examiner would expect for you to actually address the following philosophers: Epicurus, Mackey, Rowe, and Gregory Paul. Again, that would be in a general question, so just watch out if some of the questions, a different kind of question, would ask you to maybe refer to what William Rowe and Gregory Paul has tried to explain within problem of evil and suffering. Make sure that you do answer relevant to what the question is asking. So I'm just looking generally at the problem of evil and suffering, where you would put a synopsis of what these four philosophers have tried to explain. So we'll go over these quite quickly with you, just to make sure that you do understand what the four philosophers have said. So first of all, Epicurus, you can see the dates there. We're going back. This is classical Greek philosophy. And Epicurus is one of the first philosophers that we know of who has actually questioned the existence of God in the face of evil and suffering on earth. So let's have a look at his words. You don't need to memorize or learn this as a quotation. You can paraphrase it in your own way. It actually just explains what we've been discussing in the first slides. So either God wants to abolish evil, he wants to get rid of evil and cannot, or he can but does not want to. If he wants to but cannot, he is impotent. He is not all powerful, omnipotent. He doesn't have the power to stop the suffering and evil. But if he can but does not want to, then he is a wicked God. He's a malicious God. He wants bad things to happen. So this is the question of the problem of evil and suffering is addressed here. If God can abolish evil and God really wants to, then why is there evil in the world? So that is a philosopher that you are expected to refer to on any questions on this topic, general questions on this topic. This idea has been developed by a modern philosopher, J.L. Mackie, and his development is known as the inconsistent triad. So triad is the three ideas. So the three ideas are here: an all-powerful God, an all-loving God, and evil and suffering. And if they are the three ideas, if they are inconsistent, they basically just don't go together. You can't have the three elements existing together. So what Mackie has attempted to do is to show that how the problem could be solved. And the way you could solve the problem is trying to omit or delete some of these characteristics that you see on the triangle. So first of all, let's try and work how it would work if we would delete all powerful. So Mackie says if you delete the idea that God is all powerful, then you could have an all loving God in the world and evil and suffering, things like war and disease and illness happening in the world, because God does not have the power to stop these from happening. He does love us as humanity, as people of the earth, but when we suffer from evil, he is watching us, he is loving us, but can't do anything to try and stop us. He's suffering with us, watching what we are going through. So we have to ask, does it actually work if we do that? And how would religious believers respond if we were to try and delete or omit this characteristic from their belief in God? Obviously, a religious believer would not really be happy with stripping the characteristic of all powerful from the idea of God, because principally that is what a God is. It's an all powerful being. So he goes on to try and look at the other characteristics. So this time, let's try and delete an all loving God. And then it would work. You could have evil and suffering in the world, and you could have an all-powerful God in the world. It's just that he is not all-loving. He is not caring. He's not loving. He is a malicious God. He gets enjoyment from watching us suffer. So that would work for both to be able to exist. But once again, we have to look at, would a religious believer, how would they respond to this? Would they be happy from deleting the characteristic of all loving from their God? Well, obviously they would not be happy, as it doesn't fall within the description or the feature of this type of God. And the third way of trying to solve the problem would this time try and eliminate evil and suffering. So saying that there is an all-powerful God, that he is an all-loving God, but there is no evil and suffering on this world. You're denying that anything evil or any suffering is happening on the world. So again, you have to question, does this really work? How would somebody who has suffered in any way, how would they respond to try and delete the idea that there is no evil and suffering in the world? That would be insulting to anybody who has suffered, and that wouldn't make them happy. So that doesn't work either. So therefore, if they don't work and if they don't please everybody, there is a problem here, and that is the inherent problem of evil and suffering for religious people. So that's a summary of what Mackie has tried to exemplify. So we've looked at what Epicurus has said. We've moved on to looking at what Mackie has said. Now we need to have a look at what William Rowe has tried to address within the problem of evil and suffering. And within the specification, you need to show understanding of two points that he has made on the problem of evil and suffering. First of all, intense suffering, his arguments on the intense suffering, and then we'll move on to looking at the issue of animal suffering. So with intense suffering, William Rowe has tried to address the idea that a loving God would not want us to suffer such intense suffering for whatever reason. If there is a reason for our suffering on earth, which some philosophers and religious believers would say that there was a reason, something like to learn a lesson, or even as punishment, or a test of free will to see if we deserve to go into heaven. For whatever reason, the purpose of suffering is, why would God go so far as to cause such great suffering to happen? So if you have a look at the second paragraph here, why would an all-loving God cause such intense suffering in the world if there is a purpose? If there is a purpose of suffering, to learn a lesson as punishment or test of free will or any other reason, why does God have to allow such great suffering to happen? Think about the scale of suffering that's been caused recently with wars, sickness, infections, pandemics like COVID-19, or genocide, a genocide like the Holocaust. What was the point of these? What good could have come from these? If it was for whatever reason, was it necessary to suffer that much? Has it got to be that intense? Um, we could have learned lessons with fewer people suffering and dying during the pandemic or during the Holocaust. The intense suffering of 6 million Jews, at least 6 million Jews, being killed during the Holocaust. How can such a wide and profound suffering show the love of an all-powerful and all-loving God? God must have been able, could have been able to have done this in a different way with less suffering or even no suffering at all. So that's his first point on intense suffering. The second point that Rowe is trying to include in the problem of evil and suffering is referring to the suffering of animals, and he questions what is the point of the suffering of animals if there is a loving God who has created them. So Rowe uses the example of a young deer which has been caught in a forest fire. He is terribly burned and lies in pain for days before eventually dying. And he questions what is the point of this suffering? What good can come from the death of a young deer, of the young deer? The deer was one of God's animals created by God. Would an all-loving God want this to happen to one of his creation? Why did the animal have to suffer for days? Why couldn't he have instantly died? Um, what was the purpose of the death and the suffering um, for this animal? An all-loving creator God would not want this to happen to the animal and or any other animal suffering. And then moving on to what Gregory Paul has tried to explain within the problem of evil and suffering. And you need to refer to his ideas about premature deaths, or what he calls the Holocaust of the children. So according to Gregory Paul, it's impossible for a just, moral and all-loving God to exist. The reason for this is that there are so many innocent babies suffering from various diseases, birth defects, or dying prematurely. Many die without coming into the world. So Gregory Bull has estimated that 50 billion children have died of natural causes before they reached the maturity to understand the difference between a good and a bad action or deed. So Paul calls this the Holocaust of the children. Millions of innocent children have suffered and died without the chance to use and to prove their free will. They are innocent victims. They haven't done anything wrong, and they have not been given the chance to understand free will and make good decisions due to their own free will. Now, an all-loving God, an all-powerful God would not let this happen. If he was a fair and a righteous, a good God, then he would have allowed these to have lived and to understand free will and to be able to prove that they can do good actions. So he comes to the conclusion that therefore an all-loving, fair, good God would not and could not exist. if you did have time within the examination or the assessment time that you were allowed, you could refer to David Hume. I'm sure you've come across Hume in your philosophy module. He's come to the conclusion that God cannot exist. It's quite similar to what we've discussed already. He's questioned that if God is omnipotent, if he is a good God, or that we say that evil doesn't exist. And he comes to the conclusion that God can't exist. So you could refer to Hume again, but you're not expected to within the specification. So let's try and test yourself. So this is the specification, what you need to know that we showed at the beginning of the presentation. So if you would like to press the pause button and try and have a look again over these and try and test yourself. Can you explain the different types of evil, the moral, the natural? Can you try and paraphrase what Epicurus said on the problem of suffering, what Mackey has said, what William Rowe and Gregory Paul have said on the problem of evil and suffering? Test yourself. And if you have a look, we'll just draw your attention. I'm sure you've seen these before. These are the 5 bands that your assessor or examiner will use to try and give you or try and decide what marks you deserve within your answer. So there are 5 bands going from 1 up to 5, 5 being the highest marks that you can get. Within every band, you have a range of marks. So if you get a band 5 for your answer, the examiner or assessor will give you from 25 to 30 marks. A band 4, 19 to 24, and so on. So this is good for you to have a look at if you have drafted an answer, and if you answer and if you read through the answer. Is your answer thorough? Is it accurate? And is it relevant? Or is it mainly accurate and relevant? Is it accurate and relevant, mainly accurate or relevant? Is it limited or is it very limited? Have a read through some of the other bullet points. It does look at the coherence of your answer, and it looks at the reference you've made maybe to sacred texts or sources of wisdom, which could be famous people, philosophers, and so forth. So have a look at those and try and gauge where your answer and your understanding of the problem of evil and suffering would lie. This is an example of a answer that you could check on your draft if you answer a question on the problem of evil and suffering. So obviously candidates should refer to Epicurus, which we've gone through. Then you have reference to Mackey. Again, how you would logically try and look at how inconsistent the idea of a god and the existence of evil and suffering would be. You would look at trying to give a solution to the problem. So look at Mackey maybe and how he tried to solve the problem with deleting some of the characteristics. And then there is reference here to Rowe, intense human suffering and animal suffering. And then you would go on to referring to Gregory Paul on premature deaths. And then again, within the scheme, marking scheme here, you would also gain some kind of credits for looking at the different types of evil and suffering and giving examples, and the same with looking at moral evil and suffering and giving examples. Don't spend too much time on these, especially if the question is asking you to explain the problem of evil and suffering.